Keeping public meetings open. Hello, I'm Richard Pyatt, and this is Legally Speaking. Whenever there's a meeting that involves the public's business, whether it's city council or the legislature or any branch of state or local government, that meeting is subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, OPMA. These days, there are a lot of meetings going on in our state, and the Utah Attorney General's office is one of the entities with the authority to enforce OPMA. That job belongs to the Civil Review Committee, which is led by Assistant Attorney General Elliott Clark, who is joining me now. Thanks for joining me, Elliott. I'm just wondering if you can give us your thoughts on who does OPMA apply to and what does that mean?
OPMA applies to meetings of public bodies. And so the question then is, well, what is a public body and what is a meeting? And public body is defined very broadly in OPMA. And I think that's by design, right? I mean, the idea behind OPMA is that the public's business is going to be done in public. So it's going to, encompass a wide swath of public bodies. So a public body pretty much is just any policymaking or advisory or executive body of the state, county, or city governments. They have to be made up of at least two people, and they have to be supported, at least in part, by tax revenue. And finally, the key thing to keep in mind is that it has to be created, meaning the body has to be created by either the state constitution, a state code section, or an administrative rule, or even a city ordinance. And so once all of those four criteria are met, OPMA applies when that body meets and has a meeting. And a meeting does not occur unless there is a quorum present. So what is a quorum? A quorum in most cases just means a majority of this body's membership. So let's say a public body has 13 members. I think my math is right here. That's 7 would be a quorum. So 6 members could meet all day long, discuss, topics within the body's authority, and that's not a meeting, and they don't have to notice it and conduct it as a meeting. But as soon as that 7th member joins, then it's a quorum, and it's a meeting of the public body. So, we see a lot of complaints. Sometimes people will find out that 5, 6, 7 members of a body have met, and they haven't noticed it as a meeting. They haven't provided an agenda or anything. And the question then becomes, well, how many people are on this body? In a lot of cases, it's not a quorum, and so the complaint really doesn't go anywhere because OPMA hasn't been violated.
So what are the rules? Like, how far ahead does it have to be noticed? Are there general rules and guidelines that these entities need to follow?
Yes, so 24 hours, at least 24 hours in advance of each meeting, the body has to post an agenda on the Utah Public Notice website, and in certain instances on their own website if they have one. And so the agenda has to list with, it says, with a reasonable specificity, all topics that are going to be considered, any items that are going to be voted on. And so that's 24 hours in advance. During the meeting, each public meeting has to be audio recorded, and that audio recording gets posted again on the Utah Public Notice website no later than 3 days after the meeting takes place. And each public body has to create minutes of the meeting. And so there are certain time periods during which, you have to make those postings. And so the meeting minutes are just sort of a summary of what was discussed, what action was taken. The idea is that someone who wasn't at the meeting should be able to log on, view these minutes, and know exactly what the public body did and who voted in what way.
So OPMA's been around for a number of years. Do you happen to know when it started? It's been around for at least 10 years.
I think it's been a lot longer than 10 years, but no, I don't know when it was first passed.
But a lot of these entities are well aware of these rules. Do most of them comply?
They do. There are, like any law, you're going to see some bodies who don't always fully comply with OPMA, right? But I do feel confident that most of the violations that we see or that are brought to our attention are made in good faith. It has not been my experience. I've been involved now with the Civil Review Committee for just over 2 years, and I've reviewed a lot of complaints, but I've never seen a body that went out of its way to willfully violate OPMA. There really are just good faith mistakes that happen. Maybe they miss the 30-day minutes posting deadline by like a day or two. Okay, we call them and they remedy that violation. But it's really nothing extreme. So the violations, luckily, that I've seen have been fairly minor.
So are there exceptions to the rules? For example, if a meeting needs to happen if there's an emergency, if there's a flooding situation or something, or if there's sensitive business that comes up that a public body needs to have, perhaps both in a hurry and to limit the access to the public because it's an executive session.
Yes, so both of those are true. So we'll take, I guess, emergency meetings, we'll do that first. So as I mentioned, the general rule is that there needs to be at least 24 hours notice beforehand before any public meeting, right? But the legislature, when they passed OPMA, realized that there will be emergency circumstances that can't wait 24 hours. And in those cases, a body can hold a meeting and can take action at that meeting without 24 hours notice. But even still, even in those emergency situations, there has to be an attempt to reach all of the members of the public body, to get their sign off on it. Then it also requires the best notice practicable under the circumstances. So if a public body is only able to provide 2 hours notice, well, they still have to provide 2 hours notice if they're able to. But that's a pretty rare circumstance, right? Because when you think about it, most things can wait 24 hours. Even if it's something relatively urgent, it can probably wait 24 hours. And so those emergency meetings are something we really see pretty rarely. And then as far as the sensitive topics, in general, yes, the idea is that meetings of public bodies, when they're talking about matters within their jurisdiction, when they're taking votes, all of that needs to be done in public. There are certain circumstances, though, there are public bodies that deal with really sensitive topics. And so there's a long list in OPMA of reasons for which it's permissible to close a meeting to the public. The most common ones you see are the discussion of a person's character or professional competence. You may see a public body close a meeting to discuss pending or imminent litigation. Those are all permissible purposes. And when a body closes a meeting, there cannot be any votes taken in the closed meeting. So you can convene an open meeting and close it for a permissible purpose, and you can talk as much as you want about that permissible purpose. But the second a vote arises from that closed meeting, you have to open it back up and take the vote in public. So every single vote a public body takes has to be done in public.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of personnel or human resource issues would probably be discussed in
Sure.
private, but any final decision would then be would be part of the open meeting process.
Right, you'll see.
Once they've gotten done ferreting through whatever it is.
Exactly, yeah, you'll see hiring and firing discussions that take place, and the public body will discuss pretty candidly in a closed session. They may be more candid than they would be otherwise, but as far as the vote to hire, fire, sanction, or whatever, an employee or a person, that takes place in an open meeting.
How come the AG's office monitors and enforces OPMA? Are we the only entity that does that?
We're not the only entity, but we are one of the entities, of course. So the AG's office has the authority to enforce OPMA, as do all of the county attorneys in the state. So we get a lot of complaints just because we're the state AG and people, I think, know about us, but they maybe are less familiar with their local elected county attorney, or they don't realize that the county attorney has authority to enforce OPMA just as we do. And in addition to that, any individual, really, if an individual is denied a right that the individual has under OPMA, then he can bring a suit to void an action that was taken in violation of OPMA or enforce compliance with OPMA. So let's say a person wants to go to a city council meeting. He shows up at the city council meeting and they close the door and say, nope, can't come in. Well, he has the right under OPMA to be there and to attend, right? And so he could sue just individually and on his own behalf to enforce OPMA in that way. So it's the AG, county attorney, and even individuals.
So when it comes to enforcement, our enforcement is basically ensuring compliance. It's not like there's a hammer that comes down. Does our office then do things to educate people about the proper procedures?
We do. So our role, for example, in my division in the AG's office represents a whole lot of state bodies. And so in that way, we educate our client agencies. We do yearly trainings on OPMA. OPMA requires that every public body receive training on OPMA, right? And so that's what we do. Also, when we get complaints, when CRC gets complaints from people around the state, if there's merit to the complaints, we may call the public body that has been complained of and just say, hey, we got this complaint. Here's what was alleged. Let's talk through it. And so it's really educational in that way. As you say, the goal is to make sure public bodies come into compliance with OPMA and help them however we can. As we mentioned earlier, the violations that we see almost always are good faith mistakes that were made. And so in that way, that's kind of our role, just to kind of help people along, especially smaller bodies that may not have their own legal counsel. So, yeah.
How often are there complaints? How often does something come in where someone's questioning that the violation has happened?
I would say, gosh, I don't know. It really depends. It varies month to month. I would say on a slow month, we see 1 or 2 complaints. On a busy month, we'll see 10 or more. And you can always kind of tell how things are about to blow up when you see things in the newspaper. So,
Right.
and so it's just the nature of how things go. Some public bodies are higher profile than others. And so there are a lot of state bodies that meet and they conduct important business, but they sort of fly under the radar. And they may have 1 or 2 or maybe not even any public attendees. And then you take another higher profile public body and they're going to have 100 or more attendees online or in person. And so those are the agencies or the public bodies we tend to see complaints about just by nature of their high profile.
So the scrutiny tends to increase if there's a controversial issue on the agenda. People want as much access and input as much as they can. And so they tend to, from my standpoint, from a public information standpoint, people focus on the open meeting part of it.
Exactly.
They're not let in on, the ins and outs of what's going on about this issue that they feel very passionate about.
Exactly. And that's just by nature of there's more eyeballs on some meetings than others. And closed meetings that we talked about earlier, we get a lot of complaints about that. But again, as long as the public body is complying with OPMA and going through the statutory procedures, there's no violation. And so we understand that people do want to observe everything they can observe, but a public body can close for certain purposes. And as long as they're doing it in the right way for the right reasons, there's really no action for us to take.
Okay. So if somebody does have a complaint, how do they submit their concern to the AG's office, to the Civil Review Committee?
Yeah. So they can submit it to the AG's office at AG Constituent Services. So they can just Google.
Through our website.
Through the website.
There's a portal on our website. You can do that.
Yeah, and just click on Constituent Services. And once a complaint gets sent there, it gets routed where it needs to go.
Okay.
So.
All right. Very good. Well, very interesting perspective. I think a lot of people, this isn't something that is mainstream hot social media fodder, but it's something that a lot of people really care about. And it's nice to be educated about exactly what the open meetings laws are. And I thank you for joining us today, Elliott.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Thanks. This is Rich Pyatt at Legally Speaking. We'll talk to you next time.